have been used to describe me. I say describe, but maybe it's more like disguise. So I'm in sales, and what's the stereotype of sales? The stereotype of sales is that you can't trust a salesperson. So take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. So a couple weeks ago, I met with an individual who had been at the same company for 18 years, which is just remarkable. And she requested to speak with me because I have so much exposure to a range of clients in different industries. And she wanted to know, based on her skill set, what roles and what industries she might want to move to, what she would be appropriate for. This was the first time I was meeting with her, and I did it as a favor to a friend who I very much trust. And in just a matter of 30 minutes, I instantly felt connected to her. I was impressed with the nature of the conversation, the nature of her questions, and the manner of her, the way she listened and responded to those questions. And based on those very few minutes I had with her, I immediately asked her if she had ever considered sales. And she said, no, I have no interest in sales. I can't do what those people do. And it was like the manner in which she said that statement, it was like she was separating salespeople from the rest of the human race. It was, I didn't take it in the way the way it felt, but more the way it intended, like she had never considered that would be the case. So, unfortunately, that answer, when I asked that question, is a common one. Like people have this stereotype about what sales really is. The fact is that, we're all in sales. Unfortunately or fortunately. And we aren't always selling, but we are all in sales. So whether it's to get her to say yes to a date, to have your future boss hire you, to get a raise or win an argument between you and your spouse and where you're going to dine that night, we are, for better or worse, we're all selling. That's the bad news. The good news is that selling is nothing more than assimilating information in particular ways to get at what really matters to that buyer, to that other person. What are they really after? So whether your profession is sales or not, most of us go through life making a product sale. But I'm here to discuss the sale of services. But let's first distinguish between the product and the service sale. So during the sale of a product, the product itself holds the intrinsic value to the buyer. The product represents the end game to them. During this type of sale, the client doesn't necessarily have to trust you, agree with you, or even like you, because the intrinsic value is in something that's very familiar to them, familiar to the buyer. The desire for a product could be something that they need, such as gas for a vehicle, or it could be something that they simply want, like a watch or a pair of shoes. They know how much value that object has to them and the many alternatives available to them to actually obtain it. In this type of sale, that is the product sale, the buyer is willing to undergo a certain amount of pain in order to obtain what it is they want or need. And the amount of pain they're willing to endure is directly proportional to the emotional connection they have to that object and the means to get it in multiple ways. Case in point, is there an emotional connection with buying gas or buying a fuse? No. Is there an emotional connection to buying a Porsche? There is for me. So a great example of this, we'll stay on the car theme here, is the purchase of a car. So when I say car salesman, what visions come to mind? What emotions surface when you think of a car salesman? It's like a physical thing you feel, right? Car salesmen are the butt of endless jokes. They're a descriptor for a certain type of person, one which is most certainly not positive. So having worked with a car manufacturer for more than 6 years, I can tell you that the research was overwhelming. These customers, these clients, customers, wanted me to do everything I possibly could to shorten the amount of time they had to spend in a dealership and talking to a salesperson. They described a car salesman as distrusting, arrogant, and pushy. They described the car dealership experience as frustrating and a huge waste of time. but you all have your own stories. I'm sure that most of you have bought a car here. I happen to be reading the latest magazine, a leading consumer magazine, which happened to be their automotive edition. And they found similar results. So they took a poll on Facebook, and they asked, what annoys you most when buying a car? Consumers said it was the car salesperson who made the experience an unhappy one, followed by the car sales or finance manager. Many also complained about having to haggle about the amount of time it took to close the deal. And this one happens to be my personal favorite, about feeling like pawns in a time-consuming game. I mean, we can all relate to that. I know I can. However, there are very few alternatives to purchasing that car than through a car dealership and a car salesman. Well, unless you're in, right? Unless you want a Tesla. Well, maybe not. But as you know, the buyer of that vehicle also recognizes that once they obtain the car, they won't have to do this again for 4 more years. And they found a lot of comfort in that. They found even more comfort in knowing that they would never have to deal with that particular salesperson ever again. So now let's switch to services. So unlike with products, in the sale of a service, the intrinsic value is in the process. During the sale of a service, everything is reversed. You're not selling a known commodity. There is no immediate intrinsic value. In fact, in some cases, you can't even quantify the value or even identify how it will eventually be manifested, and therein lies the opportunity and the challenge. So the opportunity is that since it's not a commodity, price is less of a factor than it is in the case of a product. And the alternative is to get what you're selling them is likely to be more limited. The challenge, however, is that the client may not have a clear understanding of what they will get in the end. It likely means a much longer sales process and will require you to educate them. Since the asset, the end game in this case, to eventually be received will only occur after the process has been carried out, trust, agreement, and even likability very much matter. Unlike the purchase of a car, the client will have to interact with you and likely others from your team for some period of time, perhaps weeks or months. They must have faith in you and your ability to make good on what you told them. They are buying you as much as they are buying a result. And in this case, you and your brand represent, in many respects, the actual product. The first demonstration of your value will be in your effectiveness to listen and translate information coming at you. I say listen and translate because rarely do clients express what is actually needed. Most times clients come to me and talk in terms of solutions. We want you to do something specific. We want you to design a portal to facilitate communication among our global sales team. Or we want you to recommend handheld technologies to speed order fulfillment in our warehouse. We would like to hire you to redesign the point of sale terminal to increase transaction speed. These are all solutions. And jumping to conclusions about solutions to fix the problem isn't surprising, right? Especially in the case of engineers. I'm sorry if any of you are engineers. But jumping to a solution without a clear understanding of the problem will yield unpredictable results at best. Most times, individuals I'm speaking with don't know what the real issue is, but I'm not sure I really should expect them to know either. We can't expect someone to talk about things that they don't know. I don't know how to fly a plane, so it would be inappropriate for me to suggest new ways to position cockpit controls to make flying easier. It's just silly. But when faced with a problem, we sort of resort back to all of our previous experience and knowledge in order to apply some sort of solution to fix that immediate problem. And there's the limitation, right? It's what we already know and that experience we've That's just based on what we've already done. So let's look at this more in practice. So let's take that last example, the point of sale terminal. We would like to hire you to redesign the point of sale terminal to increase the transaction speed through these stands. And on the surface, this seems reasonable, right? It makes sense to address the point of sale terminal at a busy food chain if the goal is to increase transaction speed. However, treating a sore throat will only give you temporary relief if the underlying health issue isn't addressed and identified and resolved. Sure, you may get immediate results, but they will likely be short-lived. So back to the point of sale terminal. When I ask clients why they pick the point of sale terminal as the issue to their problem, the business had lots of theories and points of view about why that was the case. But nobody could really point to why that machine, that physical object, was the issue in this case. And when we spoke with technologists, they had slightly more convincing data. They pointed to the actual transaction data that showed gaps between one customer and another at the actual terminal itself. And when the technologists confirmed business hunches, they greenlighted this project to redesign the point of sale terminal. They wanted a redesign project. They needed something entirely different if they wanted to achieve your goal. And again, the goal here was faster transaction speed at this point of sale terminal. Had this project simply moved forward as a redesigned project, redesign the cash register, months of work and millions of dollars would have been, in this case, quite literally been spent with zero increase in transaction speed, even none. The symptom would have been treated in this case. They would have completely missed the situational factors that were responsible for poor transaction speed. So the presentations we've seen here about actually going out into the field and watching what happens. In fact, the actual cause of the issue hadn't been any of the hunches that the business had suggested either. The true cause was the customer's inability to organize and understand information. That was fundamentally at the heart of this problem. It was actually very simple, perhaps even too simple for them to realize. You see, customers that were waiting in line were unable to read the menu board hanging behind the counter clearly. So people were waiting in line and unable to understand what was available at this food stand. The size and organization of the information could not be understood until customers got to the counter, which is to say, to where people were waiting to take their order. Therefore, when customers approached, they were looking to see what was available and then made the cognitive decision about what they wanted. And it made no difference that there were two employees standing behind that counter eagerly awaiting their order. It was that cognitive choice had not been made yet. Transaction latency, in this case, was due to poor signage, not performance of the register or even the attendant working the register. So, how can you tell if you're treating a symptom or not? For me, it's about asking lots of questions. You must become that nagging child. Data like that of the point of sale terminal tells us what, but not why. I must collect and organize the information I obtain from the client for use later. Oh, and by the way, unlike the Porsche, there is rarely a strong emotional connection to the selling of a service. I've been at this for many years, and I can tell pretty early on in the process whether the solution the clients come with is rooted in a deep understanding of the underlying issue. But it's very difficult to tell them when that's not the case. So for me, clients fall into two categories and treating them very differently. Those two categories fall into two camps. There's those that truly care about achieving their goal. They aren't hung up on ego. They aren't simply interested in checking off a box. They want the job done correctly. These engagements are built off of a willingness to admit they don't have the answer and understand that you might not know either, but trust that you know how to obtain it ultimately. In the other camp are those clients that they just know it all. My favorite phrase is, we know our clients. We know what they want. These folks need to be right, and they are willing to go at great lengths to prove it. If you don't agree with them, they're likely going to find somebody who will. In the former, you're creating a relationship. In the latter, you're simply executing an order. So the educating of clients is really the finesse of the job here. Those clients that think they know it all get very positional and even hostile if you try to suggest that they're not right. And who really likes to be wrong, and certainly who likes to be told that they're wrong. So the best way to approach such an individual is to educate them using examples. So the best examples would be those case studies that draws from your work, from you or your firm has produced, like that of the point of sale terminal. The second best is just any example that gets the point across. So here are a few examples that are unrelated to my work. So in telecommunications, this one's used far too often, so I thought I'd use it too. Did you know that over the Razor's 4-year run, the V3 model, the one you're seeing here, sold more than 130 million units to become the best-selling clamshell phone in the world to date? I don't know that we'll ever have another clamshell phone, so I think this one holds the cake. So if Motorola had, their aim was to create the next phone to beat the record of this one here, and they had done so by asking their current customers, what would the next generation phone be like? I can't imagine that any of them would have said a phone with one button, or one that required charging more than twice a day, right? One that was 40% heavier than this one. Who wants those features? And yet that was the phone that everybody gravitated towards. This one is so overused in our office that I thought I'd just throw it up here. If Henry Ford had asked his customers, I don't think they would say that they wanted an Audi. This one's particularly interesting. So in cleaning, right? So by watching customers mop in just 18 homes, researchers on behalf of P&G found that half of the time was spent cleaning the mop. You had to, otherwise you're just putting dirt back on the floor. And it was that moment that born the conception for one of today's most popular cleaning products, at least in the kitchen, right? The Swiffer. Did you know it was introduced in 1999 and the Swiffer has become a $500 million industry since then, based off of 18 observations in homes? It's just remarkable. So these are all examples that challenged how consumers were currently behaving with the products existed in their various industries. So regardless of whether it's a case study or not, the best examples will be one that directly relates to their issue or goal and falls within their industry. That typically can be very difficult to get at. The way the example is to their situation, the more likely it is that I'll have to connect the dots between the example that I'm using and the issue that they brought to the table. It's through examples that I aim to create an environment where they have the opportunity to question their own assumptions. And if done so, and if done correctly, the client will then suggest new and meaningful ways to engage in this issue that they have, this solution that they're suggesting. And I won't have to tell them they're wrong, and I won't have to insult them. Now, there's always giving the client what they came for. That is, delivering to them what they suggested was the solution, regardless of whether that's what they needed. Sure, it's an option, but it certainly has its consequences. If you're not helping a client solve the underlying problem, it's unlikely that you will be working for them for very long. When the solutions are deployed and results don't show up, Either the client contact that you've been working with is going to be shuffled around within the organization, or they themselves are just going to leave. Either way, you will be associated with work that produced mediocre results. It's possible, but less likely, that they're going to continue to engage you in future solutions. So in short, during the sale of a service, create a space where the client feels comfortable challenging their own assumptions. An environment that has them feel at ease about admitting what they don't know. Help them arrive at the conclusion you know will uncover the issue, the real underlying issue, and ultimately solve their problem. Thank you. Yeah, and that happens often, right? And that's your manager expects you to get something done. I think that with the responsibility of taking on that project, in other words, executing the order that their boss gave them, you also have a responsibility to ensure that what you're executing is going to solve the problem or achieve the results. So if that person in the organization who's been delegated to execute that order isn't confident that that's going to happen, I think they have a responsibility to take that up the chain and make sure that everyone above them knows the implications of implementing this thing when there's really no assurance that it's going to provide the results they're looking for. Sure, fair, and we see that as well. You know, in a lot of cases, the solutions that they're coming to us to execute, and we are in discussions about more clearly identifying what the underlying issue really is before executing that order. There's a balance that needs to take place about what we would ideally do for those clients. In other words, really looking at the entire organization, all the different user communities that would be involved in that process or piece of software, and then what they're willing to pay for. So if we ideally would do this much and we can do this much, any amount of discovery, research that we can do will ultimately contribute to a more effective decision or perhaps user interface or business process solution. So has it become easier? So the concept of user experience, I think, is more accepted as a term. But I think there's also a deep range of definitions by which people apply to that term. So the proliferation of a lot of consumer products related to user experience, the term has become more, I don't know, generally used in the public. With that term becoming more pervasive, I think there are a lot of misnomers about what it actually means and what it means to actually do the work involved in having the user experience turn out to be something other than what people have prescribed, what people are assuming is the answer. So has it become easier? Yes, I think that we can point to a lot of consumer-facing products as examples of user experience done correctly. I don't know that they can translate the actual product of an iPhone or something else to an internal business system or internal HR system. They don't make that bridge very well. But with the proliferation of user experience becoming more accepted and widely known, has a lot more competition too. So there's that factor to sell against as well. How are you different from? How do you differentiate from? At my own firm, I've seen a lot of people come through, a lot of salespeople come through that are in the product world. They sell products, and salespeople can be a little aggressive and maybe a little arrogant, myself included. And I think we just think that if we could sell a product, we can sell a service. And fundamentally, the sale of those two things are just very different. And they approach the sale of a service, like user experience, like they approach that of a product, and they fail miserably, and it's painful to watch. So if I had to say, I think in the sale of a service, it's a lot about listening to customers and getting behind what it is they're saying to you. In the sale of a product, there's a lot of facts and figures about this product and how it relates to other products in the market. The sale of a service is really about uncovering what they're really after and what they're coming to you for, because they may talk about things and suggest things that don't really get at the problem they're trying to solve. And I think the listening part is where a lot of those salespeople may not do enough of, or actually internalize what they're hearing and translating back something that's meaningful. Well, certainly the believer is an easier sale, but the non-believer, if you're effective and you actually sell to that non-believer and they watch the process being carried out and the results that are obtained in the end, they become your biggest advocate, both within the organization and anybody who's willing to listen to them, because they themselves are working against the arguments they originally had. So, if salespeople like to be aggressive, then go after those customers who are non-believers, because those are the people you will have at your side for a long time. Yeah, and the believers are going to have lots of firms that they're very aware of that do this work, so it can be a little bit more competitive and more difficult to sell to them, because for them it's more about price, because they deeply understand that space. That's an easy one, right? So the salespeople have a certain amount of trust, and it's probably pretty low because we're called salespeople, right? You have the believer use an example specifically from their organization to sell that for you. One of my favorite, maybe perhaps the most effective way that I sell services is to have my current clients speak to a prospective client, and it could be either a current client that was a non-believer that has translated over to a believer, which is the best case because they just want to talk, and they want to talk a lot about all the results they got. Or it could be a client that I have that's a believer and has been a believer for a long time, that it's not coming from me, it's coming from somebody in a similar role in a different organization that's going to speak their language specifically about something that was done that actually translated to some results within that organization. So it's usually pretty easy so long as those two people are willing to talk to one another.